So my challenge is to speak to you about some ideas on the role of social entrepreneurship in global health. And I want to thank our host here today, as Ron Monarch, as well as a tip of the cap to John Bridgeland, who is our co-chair, who is, without possibly knowing it, a serial social entrepreneur. And as we looked at the schedule and the topics for SEcon 212, I was just flipping in my mind through the fact that Bridge is actively involved in just about all of these things. And if he were in the private sector, Bridge, there would be some antitrust issues here in terms of conflict of interest. Everything he touches turns to the good. A remarkable guy, and thank you so much for the invitation. He and I have had the pleasure of working together for about the last 10 years in malaria. Turning my talk from a desiccated scholarly academic talk to a TED talk, let me throw down a gauntlet right at the beginning. Your task at the end of this 10 minutes will be to figure out how to take the current global health spend annually of $40 billion, very little of which is spent through social entrepreneurial vehicles. Take that money and make it more effective through SE vehicles. That is your challenge. But I'm going to give you some tools, so don't worry. So to establish my own flimsy credentials for this topic, what does a guy from ExxonMobil and from Malaria No More know about social entrepreneurship? So in preparing this talk, I actually went to Wikipedia and I looked up what I thought I was doing in my own company, ExxonMobil, which was to be a champion of corporate social responsibility. And so I looked up champion for CSR in Wikipedia and was really, really pleased to know that I was redirected to corporate social entrepreneur, CSE, a term I had not known and I wasn't familiar with. So let me read you this because I think it's so profound in terms of what we're trying to do, especially at the corporate level, to distinguish ourselves. Somebody mentioned earlier the ambiguity around the definition of social entrepreneurship, corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship. Are these all the same thing or are they different? Well, Wikipedia is definitive in this area, and here is what it says. CSE is defined as, quote, an employee of a firm who operates in a socially entrepreneurial manner, identifying opportunities and or championing socially responsible activity, in addition to helping the firm reach its business targets. The CSE operates regardless of an organizational context that is predisposed towards CSR. This is because the CSE, which is the corporate social entrepreneur, is driven by their dominant self-transcendent concern with the welfare of others, as opposed to the self-enhancement personal values of CSR. Consequently, the CSE does not necessarily have a socially responsible job role, nor do they necessarily have to be in a senior management position to progress their socially responsible agenda. So this has been incredibly self-revealing in that, Bridge, I finally understand after 11 years in my job what I'm really doing. So in terms of setting the scene for our breakout roundtables to follow, let me do this in 3 parts over the next very few minutes. First, I'm assuming that many of you are not experts in global health, so let me paint a quick picture of the global health landscape. Second is speak a little bit to the current role of social entrepreneurship in the global health landscape, and then conclude with a few future ideas for your roundtable discussion on how to stimulate the social entrepreneurship space to have more of a payout and more of an impact in the global health arena. So to be very simple, global health is currently about a $40 to $45 billion annual spend enterprise to provide goods and services in the health area to the bottom billion of the world's population. The bottom billion essentially making $2 a day or less, and essentially none of that is disposable income. According to Laurie Garrett, who's the head of global health at the Council on Foreign Relations, global health programs now teeter on the edge of disaster. The world economic crisis and the politics of debt reduction are threatening everything from malaria control and AIDS treatment to well-baby programs and healthcare worker training efforts. The track record of global health spending in the last 50 years, let's just say since colonial independence of most sub-Saharan African states, has been actually pretty grim. Depending on who's counting, something like $500 billion has been spent on overseas development assistance, much of it for health. And many of the vital statistics that a government cares about, such as life expectancy, has gone from the low 60s to the mid to high 40s. Infant mortality, maternal mortality, by and large, until recently, has gone in the wrong direction. So in the face of a lot of attention to global health, especially in Africa, the numbers are not terribly encouraging, and clearly there have been oases of success. I don't mean to say that nothing has worked, but by and large, this is not an unvarnished success story. So where does the $40 to $45 billion current annual spend come from? About $16 billion, or roughly a third, come from G8 governments. The US government provides about 50% of the G8 total. About $2 billion is from the Gates Foundation, $1 billion from other private sources, $8 billion from local government budgets, and $10 to $15 billion from what is called the informal, unregulated private sector. It's immature, it's, as I said, unregulated, and it's responsible for about a third of the overall health spend, and that's typically out of the pockets directly of the indigents. So how is this money spent, and what is the potential role for social entrepreneurship? So this is where the bifurcated world of Wayne Silby comes in. I thought that was a terrific, simple metaphor that actually is incredibly valid in the global health space. Roughly 1/3 of the 40 billion plus is government to government or government to NGO aid. And some would take issue with this, but by and large, many would consider this to be charity. Worthwhile, desirable, reasonable charity, especially when it comes to humanitarian principles and the reasons for assistance. But this makes it especially vulnerable in a time of financial headwinds and fiscal constraints that we're operating in now, as no amount of charity is morally defensible. So it's hard to ratchet it up or down based on arbitrary moral principles. So besides ODA, overseas development assistance for health and domestic spending, there's also a private marketplace, which is really intriguing in most of the developing world. That's responsible, again, for about a $10 to $15 billion spend, and that's the other part of the bifurcated world. These private markets are not perfect, but over the long haul, they work reasonably well as a test of private value creation, especially of the creation of value for customers who are willing and able to pay, which is infrequently the bottom billion. So they are mostly shut out of both the formal and informal private economy, but they do participate to some degree. So I propose to define the niche for social entrepreneurship as the incredibly broad and intriguing area between these goalposts. This bifurcated world has well-established goalposts of charity and commercial markets, and a very sort of ambiguous, complicated, but hugely important opportunities in between the goalposts, which is, I believe, social entrepreneurship. So social entrepreneurs do not dispense with the notions of charity or with the market-driven goal of wealth creation, but the space is wide open to those whose social mission is explicit and central, and for whom mission-related impact becomes the central criterion, not wealth creation. Social entrepreneurs operate in public or hybrid markets, but these markets often do not provide the right discipline. So what are the potential opportunities in the global health space between these two goalposts? I would list four, but this is just to stimulate your thinking. This is by no means an inclusive menu. There are many, many others. I just wanted you to get a sense for what some big-ticket opportunities are in the social entrepreneurial space. I think by far the biggest bang for the buck for social entrepreneurs is how to make the existing spend more efficient. You already have $40 to $45 billion spend. That's part of the goalposts. I think for SEs to rethink how to take the goalposts down, or how to take the goalposts and make sure that everything is kicked in between. Specific ideas. This $40 billion spend, by and large, is by gargantuan bureaucratic bilaterals, multilaterals, very well intentioned, but historically have given short shrift to things like outcome metrics, thinking about paying for performance, accountability, sound governance of the structures that they help create, the synergy efficiencies among this vast plethora of fragmented global health players. Very little has been done. In a business context, much of this global health architecture would have been rationalized naturally over the years. There's been very little rationalization or efficiencies in terms of the big players. The second area of major opportunity, which already has a few success stories, is the area called innovative finance mechanisms to raise new money. The innovative finance mechanism term is kind of misused and abused, I think, frequently. What SEs would have in mind is not taxes. There's a history recently of international airline taxes. There is currently a major proposal before the G20 to levy taxes on foreign currency transactions. This is not what SEs would call innovative. This is basically silent and hidden taxes. But there are other really clever ideas, such as the advance market commitment, where the UK government offered a prize of £1.5 billion for a vaccine manufacturer to develop a better vaccine against the pneumococcal pneumonia, which is one of the major scourges of the developing world. And lo and behold, a manufacturer stepped forward. This is a way of incentivizing, and I'm not an economist, but kind of a pseudo market pull mechanism for having the right things happen. But there's a big, big fertile area for innovative finance mechanisms. Third is market research to find out what consumers want. Now, we take market research granted for those in the middle of the pyramid or the top of the pyramid. The people at the bottom of the pyramid are not part of market research. For instance, in our field of malaria, nobody asks the people that are the beneficiaries of the bed nets that receive them, do they want a round one or a square one? Will one person or a family of four sleep under one? Do they want one that's rainbow colored or blue or white? Nobody asks them these things. They are viewed to be, they're called end users in the trade, sometimes victims, sometimes vulnerable populations. And the very few times that their opinion is actually sought, it's called implementation research. But not true market research, and it's not handled by people that really care about what consumers want. So one whole area to think about is, what if the product specifications, access, and marketing strategies were driven by consumer preferences instead of arbitrary donor specifications? Not by the mandates of well-intentioned donors, but by what people actually wanted. The fourth area to think about, which is potentially really big and is in a very embryonic state, is health insurance. A really well-crafted health insurance, even by very poor governments and societies, I think has a tremendous opportunity if the government stimulated public sector demand and gave people a choice of where to exercise their insurance health-seeking behavior, you could actually stimulate private sector supply via public sector demand creation. Very little of this has been done. There have been some interesting insurance programs in Rwanda and the Republic of South Africa, but again, this is a tremendous opportunity to exploit going forward. So looking at this landscape, let me say the hallmark of the social entrepreneur is that they see opportunity where others see barriers, bottlenecks, and intractable problems. Social entrepreneurs make fundamental changes in the way things are done. Their visions are bold. They attack the underlying cause of problems rather than simply treating symptoms. So with this TED Talk, I encourage you in your roundtables to go forward and tell us better ways to spend the $40 billion. Thank you.